Hi again, everyone. I'm Ollie Matthews. This is the Narcissistic Resistance. This resistance video is sponsored by contribution from Anonymous, and here's her story. Dear Ollie, I've been watching your videos for about a year now, as well as binging on narc videos all over YouTube. Thank you for all that you do and your bravery to appear as yourself in front of thousands. I have a very long story to get out, and this is part one. Warning, this describes an extremely gaslit individual. Some viewers may end up shouting at their screens. My mother had me in her mid-20s and my father was in his 70s. What? Well, there's the first shout, I guess. Based on your name, I'm kind of jumping to a conclusion here, but I'm going to just keep it in the back of my mind here. I spent the first 4 years of my life in a small rural location where the only other children I had contact with were my niece and nephew, who were about my age. Their dad and I shared a father, so I was their aunt. Your nieces and nephew shared the father. So they're not really your nieces and nephews. They're your stepbrother and sister. Their dad and I shared a father. So I was their aunt. Wait a minute. The only other children I had contact with were my niece and nephew, who were about my age. Their dad and I shared a father, so I was their aunt. No, you were their stepsister. If their dad and you shared the father, that means your dad and their dad are the same. That would make you their half-sister. My father never divorced his wife, and I know that she was still alive when I was born, though I never met her. My mother always insisted that I was planned and that everyone else thought that I was an accident. My maternal uncle has hinted that my mother was with a younger relation of my father's before she got with him. The only other relative I know is my half-brother. She started telling me I was planned when I was about 6. With a 70-year-old? I remember that she volunteered the information even though I did not specifically ask her. I do not think it is appropriate to tell such a young child whether or not they are planned. My half-brother has never shown resentment towards me, even though his father left his mother for mine. She told me that when she was pregnant with me, there was a lot of rumors that my half-brother was really my father. I think this is just one big incestuous mess. I mean, maybe this was pre-gaslighting, so I did not investigate further. I know that I am definitely part of my father's family because we have looks that are distinct from the rest of the community. During my childhood and teenage years, I was very embarrassed about having such an old father. My niece used to taunt me about it in front of people, saying my father is her grandfather. She has developed into a full-blown narc sociopath whose son husbands her 12-year-old son. All right, so your niece's father was your father's I got it now. All right. Wow, that's fucked. Your niece's father is your grandfather. When I was about 4, my father had a stroke and we moved to a neighboring rural community with more people. At first, we stayed at 2 different people's houses while our house was being built. I cannot remember exactly how long this took, maybe about 6 months. Not long after we moved into our new house, I turned 5 and started school. I was very excited about going to school so I could make friends and have someone to play with. However, I had never been socialized, and the children smelled my desperation to please. So I was bullied and excluded mercilessly. I came home crying because another girl teased me about the color of my boots. I did not receive any sympathy or empathy from my mother. She told me to stop going on about it. She still reminds me about this teasing to this day. I am sure that I started wetting the bed when we were in this new house at around 5. The bedwetting did not stop until I was 7 or 8. Even my mother admits the reasons were emotional. I remember getting called into the principal's office when I was 5 for hitting an 8-year-old boy. He was in a group and accused my young male friend and I of kissing. See, the bedwetting is a telltale sign of sexual abuse. The standard advice was to walk away, so I tried to do this. When he would not let me leave, I hid him and he went and told this principal, who was related to this boy and most of the community. My mother was called but did not do much to stand up for me. Maybe she was afraid of retaliation. Fast forward 6 months later, and my mother meets my future stepdad, a 57-year-old guy who owns a third of a farm. We started going out to his place, which was about an hour away. At first, he treated me kindly, giving me fizzy drink and letting me watch videos. Of course, I eventually realized that their relationship was more than friends, and I had mixed feelings about it. My mother always frames it in terms of me being jealous of their relationship. They got married quickly. My father lived with us until he died when I was 9. Oh, so she never married your father. Okay, that makes sense. I used to get questions from the older kids at school about which one my mother liked best. It was awful. When my mother and stepfather slept together, I would want to sleep in the wardrobe. This was something they would mock me about for years to come. There was no sitting me down and listening to my feelings about the situation. I did not understand why my mother was with this older man, especially since my father was still in the house. I would get so frustrated about the situation that I would climb up a tree and cry. I think I learned that being truly honest about my feeling did not work. So when they asked me what was I crying about, I replied, I'm just practicing. Honestly, how does a 6-year-old child describe this kind of confusion? This line would haunt me for years because they took it to mean I was trying to gain attention with crocodile tears. My mother would often call me Little Nana, referring to her mother, with whom she had a strained relationship. I also remember her calling me by my father's name and accusing me of trying to get others to do things for me so I could sit down, smoke cigarettes, and drink tea. When I was sleeping in an unmade bed, she sat down next to me and said in a sweet voice that, looking back, was condescending, that she could never sleep in an unmade bed, but my father could. Another time, I remember her saying that my father had certain bad habits and that she was trying to get more of her in me. My mother was a keen horsewoman and taught me to ride. While she was teaching me, I told her something that was meant to be done but failed to do it. She would say caustically, I heard a lecture before. I remember after we had a disagreement about her riding, her yelling at me saying, I've been riding since I was 13, 20 years. I do not remember the exact context, but is it really necessary to yell at a young child as if you have to prove something? When I was 4, she would often accuse me of looking for sympathy and saying that you can be a very poor miche. She was very sarcastic, and when I would say something to her that was new knowledge to me, she was often sarcastic toward me as if I was trying to act superior to her. She explained to me where babies come from very early. In fact, I think I was about 4. In fact, I cannot remember not knowing. She often tells the story of when I was about 4, I let the female dog out when she was in heat because I wanted puppies. I remember that I was about 6 when she explained what condoms were. This explanation was prompted by a visit to the doctor where she asked the doctor for them, and I curiously asked what she was buying. I must have been around 6 or 7 when she started talking about the fact that men have a very strong desire to have sex and that some of them will say anything to get it. Right around the time you started wetting the bed, huh? She also told me that for some of them, once they have had sex, then it is no big deal anymore, and they do not want you. She told me at around 6 to insist that a man wear a condom or tell him that you're not having sex, and that if he doesn't care enough about you enough to wear one, he doesn't care about you. From my childhood to my teen years, she drilled into me that relationships are easy to get into and hard to get out of. When I was about 9 years old and my father was dying, I was friends with a little boy who was about my age. He was also a social outcast and homeschooled like me. I guess we were both lonely, so we had that in common. One evening when I was staying at his house while my father was dying in the hospital, he kissed me on the forehead. At the time, in a very childish way, I thought this to be very romantic. Because our houses were some distance from each other, we used to talk on the phone. I remember that I used to get very lonely because my mother was so preoccupied with running the house, caring for my father, and looking after my little brother. I would ring my young friend on the phone, and one day he told me that he loved me. Being so lonely and starved for attention and understanding, I treasured those words. When he stayed over our house, we decided to sleep in the same bed. His idea. He held me tight and told me he loved me. We did not attempt to actually do anything, but we did talk about sex in a childish way and fantasize about growing up and getting married. My mother came in and put me in another room. The day when the little boy was gone, my mother started to talk to me about the moral implications about what I had done. I remember that she started off by saying, "I know you're not little kids anymore. Cuddle up for a bit of warmth. There's a bit more to it than that." Of course, I was not allowed to tell my version of the story or express my feelings. She yelled at me and said, "Imagine." Now, mind you, she's the one who let the 9-year-old sleep and get in the bed together to begin with. So your mother set this all up. She yelled at me and said, "Imagine if you had been a few years older, 13 or 14, you could have ended up very pregnant and ruined your life." She proceeded to tell me that God's order is for a man and woman to get married first, and what we had done was very wrong. Jesus Christ. Can't even let kids be kids. I remember feeling so guilty for a long time afterwards. At the time, I did not connect the dots or point out that she had been very promiscuous in her youth and admitted to sometimes having 2 boyfriends at the same time. She was also not married to my father and that he never divorced his wife. As a teenager, I remember her recounting a story where she had a male childhood friend who invited her to sleep in the same bed and framed it in a very innocent light. Apparently, when she told her mother, she simply tried to tell her, you really don't do that, dear." At the time, I did not make the connection, but now I see the contradiction. When my mother caught us, she did not discuss any of the emotional issues that I was going through with my father dying, or the fact that I did not have any friends my own age, or that my stepfather was constantly verbally harassing me about stuff I couldn't help, and that I was made to feel like a fifth wheel because I wasn't his. I know what we did was wrong and is not something that any parent wants to deal with, but I do not think we should have been treated as teenagers or adults making the same mistake. My mother used to have this book about sex that she used to leave in my room. It had pictures of naked adults in sex positions. I'm ashamed to say that I looked at the book with my friend and was fascinated by some of the content, especially the part about puberty. Yeah, your mother was setting you up so she can tear you down. Your mother set you up for all of this. I think I hoped my body would hurry up and develop so I could attract a man who would love me. I know that looking at a book was wrong, but where was my mother's supervision? Why did she put it in my room and not keep it in hers? Because she wanted you to see it. That's why. I got my period at 10, and when I told my mother, she asked to look at my knickers, which I allowed her to. I did not think anything about it at the time, but now I think it is gross, and I would not do it to my daughter. I remember her telling her mother in front of me that I had my period. I was absolutely mortified. On my second period, my niece asked my mother what was wrong with me. She said in front of everyone that I had my period. When I confronted her on how embarrassed I felt that she told everyone, she just acted as if I had informed them I had a common cold. At the time, I thought I would never do that to my daughter, and I still feel that way. When I first developed breast buds, she pinched them, and she said I was getting little boobies. As a teenager, she would pinch my backside when I was getting in the car so I couldn't fight back. Oh, my mother would do that. You could see the sick sexual pleasure she got out of it, having to put their hands on you. When I was a teenager, my stepfather's nephew, who was 7 years older, was like a big brother figure. Sometimes he would come to our house for a shower because his hot water was not working. My stepfather would say to me, do you want to wash his back? Implying that I had a crush on him. I never fantasized about him sexually. My stepfather got off on my shame and embarrassment. Yeah, that sounds like my father. This is something that I'm particularly ashamed of. My stepfather was an asshole, plain and simple, and was never going to change, let up, or see my point of view. When I was 13, my brother and stepfather were play fighting, and because he used to triangulate me so much, I was desperate for a scrap of my stepfather's attention and approval. When I saw my brother and him were having fun, I don't know, I know where this is going. I joined in, and he poked the side of my breast. I wish I could say I had enough self-respect to avoid him from then on. But I would still play fight and hug him in a foolhardy attempt of gaining attention of some kind of fake love. I would hug him and play fight with him. One night he asked me to come into his bed and said that he bet that he could make me squeal. On another occasion, he pulled my top. When I finally gathered the courage to tell my mother, she told me I was going to get that because I was an attractive woman. She told me that it happened because I had been playing and that the physical contact had caused this, and pointed out how I did not touch my male step-cousin who was 7 years older than me. She said she believed me because she knew I was honest and sensitive about my body. I felt cold and shaky, and she explained to me that I had a shock. She talked about the fact that our society runs on lust and how advertisers use attractive women to get the guys drooling. The next morning, she told me that I had read too much into the incident and that I needed to bury and forget it because I had an important exam. When I told her he tried to get me into bed, she said, "It's just part of life, sweetheart. You're going to get that because you're an attractive woman," and gaslit me into thinking this was normal. This is a woman who slept within her 20s with a 70-year-old man. Not to denigrate your father. And then ran off, married another guy, and your father had to live there and watch her banging your stepfather as he died. There's nothing normal about your fucking mother. Your mother is a sexual goddamn deviant. She told me a lot of fathers find themselves very attracted to their daughters, and a lot of them act on it and end up in incestuous relationships, which is what I said at the beginning. This whole thing sounds incestuous. Then pointed out how guilty male sexual abuse victims must feel because they probably enjoy it. After telling her nothing was done, I was careful to avoid him, but the covert sexual abuse did not stop. From about age 11, I would lie in bed at night and fantasize that I would one day meet the perfect man that would treat me right and that I could have the perfect family with him. Once I got into my teen years, this got more intense. I would compulsively masturbate to dull the pain of loneliness. I felt so damaged and afraid of men that I thought that a relationship could only exist in a fantasy for me. I just knew I would never measure up and would be rejected. The other part of me craved contact to please a man. I would read Cosmo articles about how to please and keep a man, but they all talk about how unfaithful men are and how they are never satisfied with one woman. And this is all because your mother made you think all your value is attached to whether a man or you can get a man or not. Because your mother uses her vagina to get what she wants. And she put in you, your only value is through your vagina as well. I felt very guilty for reading those Cosmo articles because I had Christian beliefs, but I was desperately searching for a cure for my loneliness. During my early 20s, I told a few guys that I liked them, and they wisely rejected me, sensing my life was trouble. I would fall for any guy who was kind to me or paid me any attention. In my mid-20s, I met my narc husband while teaching English in East Asia. He was local and mirrored me, appearing to empathize with me and my situation. Back then, I did not know anything about narc abuse, so I fell hard for his love bombing. I speak the language fairly fluently, and all my interactions with his family were in their language. Although he spoke near perfect English, we would often speak in his language together. We were married within a year of meeting. He was not a virgin, but pretended to be a Christian and agreed to save sex for marriage. I was ashamed to say I compromised my principles due to the influence of an older so-called Christian friend who said that it was unrealistic to have no bare skin touching until marriage. Although we did not actually have sex, we did almost everything but. I hate the fact that I compromised my principles, although he was very sexual before marriage and would often hint at romantic indulgences after marriage. We were married and would withhold love and affection as well as sex. On our wedding night, he stayed up late downloading software from my mother, who had come over for the wedding. After the wedding, the verbal abuse and gaslighting slowly increased. Then, about a year after our marriage, we went back to my country for my younger brother's birthday. When he was in my country, his control really revved up. He raged at me for leaving something on the floor. He stayed stuck to his phone when we were traveling and ignored me. On a plane ride to visit my uncle, he was told to turn off his phone but continued texting. I asked him to put it away because he was being disrespectful to the stewardess. He replied that mobile phones really don't interfere with the signal. I said that's not the point. It's the stewardess's job to tell others to turn their phone off, and you're just making her job difficult. He then started to ignore me and turned his back. I was desperate to be understood and did not know about narcs, never saying sorry or that I was dealing with a narc. Feeling rejected and misunderstood, I put my hand on his arm, hoping to reason with him. Out of the blue, he punched me hard in the nose and drew blood. On the plane? Through the shock and pain, I said thanks for the good times. I know I had read somewhere that men always hit you again. In that moment, I had the resolve to leave. However, when we arrived at my uncle's place, I just focused on getting through the trip in a dazed and confused state. During that trip, he began to ignore me more and more, one occasion threatening to walk off because I disagreed on what route to take. When we arrived back in his country, his abuse escalated. When I suggested he get counseling for his anger issue, he just told me that I was nagging him. When I talked to another Christian expats, they told me to pray for him. They obviously had no idea about narc abuse and that narcs don't change. After a year of marriage, his family started pressuring us to get pregnant. I had always wanted children and was excited at the prospect of becoming a mother. I was so shocked and devastated after the first attempt failed. Then after trying for 6 months, the tension finally exploded. We went to visit his grandparents and extended family. All they could talk about was babies. At that stage, I still really wanted to please them, so that really triggered me. His grandmother cornered us and asked us if we were using protection or just couldn't get pregnant. In their culture, you are basically required to answer elders. His mother stepped in and said that she did not know if we were using protection or couldn't get pregnant. After this, I felt so sad, violated, and hopeless that I wanted physical contact with my husband. I tried to hug him, but he raged at me and accused me of being clingy and not being able to do anything by myself. After this argument, his mother came and urged us to make peace. When we were trying to get pregnant, he was not that into sex. I would initiate, and he would decline or make me feel dirty for wanting to, or making excuses that he had to work the next day, and then spend half the night watching TV. Yeah, I think he's gay, and he has gay rage. That's what it sounds like. And it's not all that surprising that you would attract one of these down low gay narcs. He was on a busy schedule, but he could make time for other things. At one stage, he said he could divorce me because I wanted to have sex in the morning. Maybe I was over interested in sex because I had waited until my mid-20s and he had not waited. Anyway, it was so frustrating to have all that drive and desire and have it constantly rejected. After 6 months of trying, I was starting to get concerned that he did not want that, and I did not want him to suffer the shame of not having a child, but I did not want to lose him either. I was anxious to know if I was okay, but was studying online and wanted to finish my exams for that semester first. However, one night he came home and told me how everyone was getting pregnant, even his younger friends. He asked me when I was going to get checked out. I replied, soon. Well, that answer was not specific enough, and he flew into a rage and yelled, "You know how much I like children?" Sheepishly, I answered, yes. Well, he was the one rejecting sex, so... Then he growled, "Then what are you waiting for?" I felt so shocked and isolated. I guarantee you what happened is somebody questioned his sexuality and his manhood, and now he's projecting all this blame onto you. I guarantee you that's what happened. Guarantee it. Now he's desperate to prove his manhood. I felt so shocked and isolated and just wanted the verbal battering to stop, just like with my stepfather. I agreed to visit the expat OBGYN as soon as possible. To do this, I had to get up early and travel to another city. He was not able to accompany me because he was working. That did not worry me at the time, but looking back, it was pretty shitty behavior when he could have waited until he was when we could have waited till he was free. The doctor told me there was no obvious reason that I could not get pregnant. I came home and told him this. Then that night I asked him, if it turns out that I'm infertile, do you still want to be with me? His answer was to give me a little time. I spent the entire night in a nervous panic state. The next day I tried to express my feeling to him. His answer was, don't judge me. I have my colleagues all breathing down my neck about it. That means they're questioning his manhood. This guy's gay. You married a gay guy. Sorry, you did. I know it seems ridiculous, but I was genuinely concerned for his face and emotional well-being. Infertility is a huge emotional hurdle for men and women. I did not want to burden him by expressing my desire for a child or asking him for excessive sex. The clincher is one night I was so frustrated I blurted out, I have every right to demand that you go and get tested. He retorted, I've already proven I can. It's a shame. It's the shame of my life. That confession sent me into a tailspin of emotion. I felt furious that he hadn't told me and petrified that it might be me. When I confronted him on it, he gaslit me, saying that he did not want to hurt me by telling me he was telling me he was fertile, obviously completely discounting how his raging made me feel. Around 2 weeks later, tension exploded over his mother's constant badgering me over getting pregnant. I had tried politely to tell her that she would be the first to know when the event occurred. However, she would not respect the boundary. After a heated argument back and forth, he threw off his ring, and I told him I could not bear the strain of his mother's interference. I told him I would ring his mother to tell him the truth about our relationship. She seemed to comfort me by saying we could adopt, and then asked me if tests confirmed I was infertile. The next day, my ex and I had a huge fight about his mother's constant prying. He told me my emotions were very unstable, putting all the blame on me. We did end up going to his parents' place for dinner, where my mother-in-law chimed in and said that we should not have used birth control. At what point do you get up and you tell these people to go fuck themselves? I was so incensed that she would make such a ridiculous and sensitive comment. I wanted to shout, but I tried to be the bigger person and reason with her by saying that the comment hurt and that there was nothing that could be done about the past, even if it were true. She talked straight over me, which fueled my fire even more. Looking back, it was my need for validation that allowed them all to control me so well. But at the time, I was unconscious of it. We moved from the kitchen to the living room, and both my ex and mother-in-law accused me of ruining the lunch evening. She casually suggested that her sister-in-law could examine me. Oh my God! Why is it Jesus? This is why I said what's your name. It's the culture. It's a fucked up culture. I knew it. Like, I knew the culture was coming into this. It's like everybody's in everybody's fucking business. I'm sorry, the guy you married is gay, and I might even, if it's even true that he got somebody pregnant, he's such a narcissist, and it's the shame of his life. He's such a narcissist, it wouldn't surprise me if he ran out and got a fucking vasectomy after that, so it would never happen again. Wouldn't surprise me. By this stage, I was a ball of fear and fury, but I still tried to stay calm and tell her I did not want to do that because I wanted my info to stay private. Confidentiality hardly exists in my ex's country. That's what there is. I know. And that's part of the problem. Then my mother-in-law retorted caustically, how would you go in the old days with a male doctor giving birth in a big pool of blood? This was the absolute last straw, and I stood up and shouted, I think I said something like, back off. Then my ex threatened to beat me unless I went home and stood up to him and grabbed me off the couch by my legs and spun me around on the floor. I hate to think what would have happened if my mother-in-law had not intervened. I walked on this. That's gay rage. That's gay rage. I'm sorry, that is gay rage. I walked home and grabbed some stuff and then stayed the night at a friend's place. When I recounted the incident and the behavior to the other expats, not to them, told me to get out. As it turns out, this incident happened. When this incident happened, I was actually pregnant. Walking home from the incident, I had in my mind to leave and actually stayed the night at another expat's house. He sent me a post from the internet about becoming the perfect partner rather than looking for one. I was so traumatized and desperate that I believed him and went back to our house. Looking back, I had a severe case of Stockholm Syndrome. 2 weeks later, I got a positive pregnancy test and sent a photo of the text to my ex. When he came home from work, he raged at me because supposedly I did not eat well enough. This hurt me because I really wanted to be a good mother. When I called my mother-in-law to tell her the good news, with absolutely no emotion, replied, "That's good." After all the pressure to get pregnant, she couldn't even be happy for me. When I was around 6 months pregnant, when I was around 6 months pregnant, my ex, and his parents went back to my country for a holiday to check out the universities. When we arrived at a messy backpackers that I had booked, my mother-in-law said these people can really make do. I was extremely embarrassed at the state of the room, but I thought that it was rude of her to make that comment. Plus, I was exhausted and pregnant. I tried to tell her how I felt after a heated argument. She turned it around on me and accused me of causing her high blood pressure. My ex threatened to divorce me. This was a common threat whenever we disagreed with his mother. They left me in a hostel room by myself and went to the tourist sites by themselves. I guess that I became so accustomed to this treatment that I just carried on. We went and checked out the universities that my ex wanted to attend and saw the sites. I just went along in a zombie state. One time during the trip, when it was just two of us, he got lost trying to find the toilet. I thought my phone was out of credit, so I did not try to call him, although I was, of course, worried. It turns out I could have because of the plan, but I did not know this. He absolutely raged at me for accusing me of not caring about and being a cold wife. The constantly raging narcissist is usually the closet homosexual. I'm sorry. This is where it comes from. It's where my father's rage comes from. I know this rage. I know this rage. Naturally, I apologized and tried to calm him down, and he forgave me, and we went back to our hotel room. When the trip ended, we went back to his own country, and I returned to mine, and went back to stay with my niece, who I later discovered was a narc and son husband's her child. My ex came to stay with me after the birth of my daughter for about 2 weeks. Although he was very hands-on with the baby, he would subtly undermine my parenting. For example, I knew how to bathe her because the midwife had shown me. He wanted to tell me how to do it as if I was an idiot. There is also many other subtle digs. He returned to his country, and I returned to my niece's home. After a few months living apart, I guess I got some clarity and got very frustrated when he asked for some loving words. He replied, "I'm working." When I told him that it's just a short sentence, he accused me of throwing a tantrum and wrote a whole tirade about how I was being unreasonable. This finally sent me over the edge, and I told him I was finished and that I would cancel the spouse's visa that I applied for. Ironically, my niece actually encouraged me to make the decision and leave, despite the fact she herself a son husbanding narc. My daughter is now 3, and I have been no contact with my ex for 2 years. Obviously, there's a lot more to this story, and I will send it in installments. Anonymous. Well, Anonymous, your next step is to get out from the son husbanding niece's house. Okay, but all this was set forth by your mother, instilling to you your only value is through your fucking vagina, and then getting involved with a culture where there is no privacy. And it doesn't seem like there was much privacy in your culture either. Okay? I think you met a guy, okay, on the down low, a closeted homosexual who gay rages when his manhood is challenged. And you did the right thing, cutting him out. The next step is, what are you going to do about the people that put you in that position to begin with? Your mother and the rest of your family. With your incestuous past and you having a young 2-year-old daughter, you have to get this right at this point. So, thank you so much for your contribution. Thank you for your story, Anonymous. I really appreciate it. Thank you to everybody watching. Please leave any opinions or advice in the comments section below. And again, if you want your story read on the channel, you have a topic you'd like me to cover, a narcissist you'd like to expose, you'd like to set up Skype, phone call, have a private video made, Facebook live chat, or you'd like to sponsor a video like this for someone who can't afford one and needs help, or you just want to sponsor the channel in general for new equipment, see it grow, keep the lights on and the rent paid, that's always great as well, because this channel is funded 100% by contributions from you. If you're unsure of how to get your content on the channel, please wait for the instructional video link to pop up on the screen at the end of this video to walk you through all of that. Please like and share this video wherever you can. Subscribe to my channel if you haven't, and be sure to click the subscription bell to be notified of all video uploads. I'm Ollie Matthews. This has been The Narcissistic Resistance. Take care.